Yes. I think we're already rolling, so we can start when we're ready. I'm just going to clap. Hi, good day. Welcome to another episode of Unapologetic. I'm your host, Ashfaq Karim, and I'm very pleased to welcome to our studio David Hearst, the editor-in-chief of Middle East Eye.
Pleasure to be here.
David, good to have you. Always good to speak to you. David, it's been 3 weeks, more or less, since Trump and Netanyahu launched their war on Iran. It's been a devastating war already. Lots of infrastructure has been destroyed, more than 1,500 lives, probably at least 1,500 lives lost in Iran. Upwards of 500 people have been killed in Lebanon. Israel has displaced almost 1 million people in Lebanon. Hundreds of thousands of people are likely displaced across Iran. Iran has responded by attacking key Israeli and US assets across the region and important infrastructure in Gulf countries. Has Trump lost control of the war?
Well, I think he was never in control of the war. I think from day one, Iran responded quite differently to the way he thought they would respond. They were struck with a devastating blow. They lost 40 of their leaders, at least 40 of their leaders, in a meeting with the Supreme Leader, who also lost his life. And within an hour, the missiles started flying, i.e. they never lost for one moment command and control. They had planned for this moment ever since they were surprised by the attack in June, which came in the middle of negotiations as well. So they had planned for this day, and they executed their plan, and they're still executing their plan. The person without a plan, plan A or plan B, is Trump. Netanyahu has a plan. And that's very clear that he wants a war until the regime is destroyed, and then he wants to split Iran up into ethnic groups and weaken it permanently, because Iran is the one power that stands in his way of Greater Israel, or his so-called hexagon of states. But Trump doesn't have that vision, and he doesn't want a long war. 3 weeks into this war already. And we're starting to see strains like various allies running out of missile interceptors, like having to cannibalize or take a THAAD system from another ally in another very important part of the world, in Korea, South Korea, and to ship it around the world to shore up the THAAD missile defense systems that have been damaged by or knocked out by Iranian drones, which are extremely accurate. Now, what Iran is doing is a steady stream, not necessarily as intensive as day one, but a steady stream of attacks on Israel, on US targets, but also increasingly on the Gulf itself, which is generating a lot of anger. And the bit by bit, the focus of the war, the front line of the war, is descending on the Strait of Hormuz, which, I spoke to Iranian diplomats last November, in which they said, we'll close the Strait of Hormuz if we're attacked again. And they're doing exactly that. Now, any attempt to keep that straits open is a very, very big war, because you'd have to physically occupy the land around the Strait of Hormuz, but also far wider, because this is well within Iranian drone range or missile range. So there was a US commander, a naval commander, recently quoted as saying this would just be like a shooting gallery if we try to escort ships through, which is Trump's stated intention. So I'm increasingly of the view that because this war has actually no fixed goals in Trump's head, Trump can stop it. Trump can stop it simply by declaring victory and walking away. But that's in Trump's mind. And he will have some discomfort in stopping it. But the only way forward, other than a deepening war and use of ground forces, which would be a game changer in this war, game changer in the wrong sense of the word, it would be absolute disaster. That's one direction the war can take. But the other direction is that Trump simply says, fine, we've done enough. We've smashed up Iran. It doesn't have a navy anymore. It doesn't have a nuclear program because we smashed that again. and job done. Israel wouldn't like that, but Israel would have to accept what he says. But I think there are just basically two alternatives. One, him saying, I declare victory and at a certain point and walking away without having achieved any of his objectives like regime change. He has achieved the degradation of Iran, but they can rebuild. Or this Gaza-like effect that we're seeing now of the more resistance that's being put up, the more damage is being done, the more physical damage that is being done. They're going to run out of targets. They're now trying to hit roadblocks with bombs. I mean, that's an absolutely mad, crazy thing to do. But they've gone through all their target lists, other than trying to get, and they really must be trying, to get the location of the new and very effective leaders that Iran has got, i.e. the son, Mojtaba Khamenei, who is now the supreme leader, and Ali Larijani, who is very effective in running war. Now, if they can claim, as they did with Hezbollah and Hamas several times over, that they can get to them and they can decapitate them a second time, maybe they'll think that they've done that. But at the moment, they're in a scenario where the longer Iran holds out, the more intense the war becomes, and the more frustrated and more violent it becomes as well.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned that Trump can call this, and that will not be in Netanyahu's interest, but it kind of have to go with it. But Iran obviously have responded harshly because they've basically been sitting ducks, not just for 2 years that Israel has been bombing them since October 7th, but even before then, whenever, there's sanctions, they're sitting ducks. They don't have any really agency to stop that, no matter what they do at the negotiation table to a large extent. And in terms of the last 2 years, they've been bombed willingly. So they're not, the reason why they've responded like this way is because to say, we're not going to accept these random strikes on us anymore. This was not just a random strike. Like you said, it killed the actual leadership of the country. And so will Iran accept that? At which point does it become feasible for Iran to say, okay, we think that we've degraded your assets in the region enough as well. Now it makes sense for us to also agree to the ceasefire that you're asking for.
Well, undoubtedly, Iran, as I would be, is very angry at what happens. I think it entered the negotiations in good faith twice. Twice, America just walked away. Once in a surprise attack. Now this wasn't a surprise, but they did. I think the Omani foreign minister was absolutely correct in saying that there had been a lot of progress, not on all the files, but on the main one. Iran made an offer that it hadn't done in the JCPOA, which Trump walked away from, the nuclear agreement that Obama concluded with Iran. And that offer was to dilute all of its stock, its entire stock of highly enriched uranium, about which there was intense speculations. Why do they need highly enriched uranium when only they're pursuing a civil nuclear program, as they say? So this was a breakthrough, possibly. It wasn't everything that America wanted, but it was a substantial offer, and Trump walked away from it. So Iran is quite right to be angry, and quite right to think that they're in a continuous war, that it was their mistake to accept a ceasefire in June. They should have just continued. However, that's what they say publicly. Privately, I think messages are being passed about how this war stops. And the parameters of a ceasefire deal would have to be some sort of commitment to keep international traffic flowing through the Strait of Hormuz, as well as a ceasefire of all attacks on Iran, and presumably an equal ceasefire on all attacks on Israel and the Gulf states. So I don't think the diplomatic door has been entirely shut. I think it can be reopened at some point. But the first step has to be taken by Trump.
Okay, now you say messages being passed. When you say that, you mean between the Iranians and the Americans, Americans, Israelis, and the Gulf states, and Iran? Who do you think's back-channeling negotiations?
Between Iran and America.
Okay, so you think that, what would, I mean, in the event that Trump and Iran reach an agreement, I can't see Netanyahu, he would comply, but he wouldn't comply. He'd probably still try to occasionally bomb Iran. There may be efforts, intelligence efforts to sort of destabilize Iran from within. There was discussions of arming Kurds, etc. I mean, I don't see that stopping. So how does this go?
But on the other hand, none of these things have worked. Iran has shown that it's a much tougher nut to crack than either Hezbollah. Hezbollah has shown this as well, by the way, or Hamas. In fact, all three of them have had the capacity to endure multiple strikes and keep on functioning as a resistance group or as a nation that resists this. And I simply don't see that if Trump said stop, Netanyahu would be in any position to carry on going. It could go back to its assassination campaign, and then we would go back to the same thing that happened before the war, which was Iran basically not replying to it. Now, there is a very legitimate question. If Trump stops, why would Iran stop as well? But Iran also has to recognize it's faced with a hugely more powerful enemy that has knocked out key resources. And at some point, the calculation amongst a pragmatic leadership, and Iran has shown great pragmatism in the past, and has not attacked the Strait of Hormuz until now, and not attacked the UAE, and not attacked Dubai, and not attacked Saudi Arabia, even though it was itself attacked multiple times. I think that pragmatism will come to the fore again, and they will want a period of recovery.
Okay, I mean, there's two things I want to touch on. So the one is Trump increasingly seems to be becoming isolated. He put in a call very recently to get international allies of the USA to help with the Straits of Hormuz. That hasn't been received well. What's your response to that before we move on to the second thing?
Well, I think it's a statement of the obvious that protecting the Straits of Hormuz in the current situation would be to join in an act of war. Yes, of course, you could say that it's protecting international shipping from going through. It's pushing the price of oil up and whatever. But this is the new front line. And it would be impossible to escort a ship through and fire back at Iranian positions without actually becoming completely part of the war effort itself. And I think that is behind either their refusal. Starmer has refused outright. The French, I've just talked to the French ambassador in Oman, are only sending a battleship to the East Mediterranean to defend NATO installations from drone attacks from Iran. There is a previous EU security arrangement around the Bab el-Mandeb, which is at the other strait, which is could shut off the Red Sea traffic. That was before the war. They could send warships there to reinforce that, but no way is France going to start escorting tankers through the Strait of Hormuz, because they realize that that's exactly what Trump wants them to do.
I mean, Germany have also flatly refused. The Japanese have refused, and South Korea have also refused. So I mean, he's increasingly becoming isolated. You mentioned that Iran will need, that their infrastructure has been hit. They've been degraded quite substantially. U.S. bases in the region have also been hit. I would say some would even think surprisingly, given the fact that there's so much money and billions of dollars out there to protect those bases, as compared to the relatively cheap drones that Iran has. How easy do you think it will be for the US to rebuild that capacity, especially because the Gulf states are probably quite upset that all these bases couldn't really protect them when the Iranian drones started falling down?
I think the ramifications of this, when this stops, will be quite wide. One, is the American security umbrella worth it? They've paid trillions of dollars to get Trump on side. He's just delivered a huge war. That will have some years to digest. And what other partners they possibly could have. This could push Saudi Arabia to seek it has already got a military agreement with Pakistan, but behind Pakistan and providing the hardware for Pakistan's army are the Chinese. It's already been very interested in agreements with the Chinese about the price of paying for their oil in yuan rather than in dollars. And it could develop that relationship. It could become a military relationship. That's one way. I think they would wanted to diversify their allies. I'm not sure they'll be ready to shut out the Americans altogether, because that would take a huge time. I mean, but the other thing that we don't really know is that we see the pictures from one side, but we don't really know the damage that has been caused. This is all kept from satellite or public scrutiny, just about how damaged those bases are. And I think for a nation that wanted to pull out of the Middle East originally, or to pivot towards Asia, this has been a series of horrific blunders, because they've started a major war they can't stop. They've been hit really hard. Obviously, they can carry on. I'm not saying that anyone's on their knees, but it's already consuming a huge amount of their firepower. It's pushing the price of petrol up. This is not anything like what Trump promised when he came back to power. He said he'd be the president of peace. He wouldn't start wars again. And he'd bring the price of oil down, all of which he's failed to do. He's facing midterms. He's got a very, very fractured MAGA party who are now quite open about saying this is not a war. This is the wrong war for us. What are we doing in that? And the longer this war carries on, and the more resistance he gets from his allies, and the more Iran resists itself just by carrying on doing exactly what they're doing, the more difficult situation Trump will find himself in. Yeah. And that is the pressure that will stop the war.
Now, we started off by asking, how Trump's lost control. I remember speaking to a few analysts on the show, among them Andreas Krieg, about 2-3 months ago, when it was speculated that a strike may occur. This was when there were protests in Iran, and I mean, then it became quite clear from the guests I was speaking to that the difference between the Israelis and the Americans is that, like you mentioned, the Israelis want to sort of degrade the state, chop up the states, cause chaos, cause as much internal harm to Iran and possibly the region as possible. Whereas the US are actually just looking for a better partner in Iran, not necessarily someone from outside the regime, but just the regime that's going to be more compliant, more friendly, open up business pathways so that, that the corrupt elements of the regime could benefit financially, but so could Trump, so could other US businesses, and so could allies in the Gulf. That seems to have backfired because Khamenei's replaced Khamenei, Mujtaba has replaced his father Ali. And it seems like, the elements of the IRCG that could have been maybe turning more towards integration with the region and a more friendlier face with the USA would now be more upset. What's your response to that?
Well, definitely the response to an existential crisis, and this is an existential crisis, this is what they're fighting for, is the existence of the Republic itself. They're fighting for 47 years. And these people have already been sanctioned hardened, but also battle hardened. This is a generation that as youth fought another existential war, which was Saddam Hussein's invasion of Iran, then supported by the West and then funded by the Saudis and the Kuwaitis. It lasted 8 years, and Iran suffered horrendous, over 1 million people suffered from gas attacks that Saddam hit them with, which again was provided by German precursors. And they survived, and they pushed back the invasion. And then they resolved to make sure that they had people in post-Saddam Iraq that were across the political spectrum, that they actually had control of Iraq. Hence the establishment of the PMUs and the militias, which were now both part of Iraq's forces, but also they have their own foreign policy and their own agenda, and they're using them. That's the people we are talking about. Now, I don't think, with a history like that, that they're going to suddenly just give in. I think it's very difficult to talk about Iran because there is genuine repression. And there were two general uprisings that were dismantled quite brutally, with many thousands dead. But also, there was undoubted foreign interference from the CIA and from Mossad. Mossad even boasted they were on the streets in January, presumably firing the first shots at the Basij, and hundreds of policemen who died. And then we get the repression that follows. And the fact is that the two things are happening at the same time. One, yes, there is repression. But two, it also has been inspired totally cynically, with no care for the loss of life, or indeed the future seeds of Iranian democracy, which can only be decided within Iran itself. No care for different factions in Iran, like the reformists. This is just a bloody campaign to devastate and destroy and dismantle Iran in the same way that they dismantled Gaza, or trying to dismantle the Palestinian society in the West Bank. That's their objective. And they won't succeed, but this is not a regime that is remotely inexperienced at dealing with this sort of threat, which is why I think it will prevail.
Okay, so you mentioned that Trump's looking for a way out. I think that's clear. I think it's been clear that he's looking for a way out from the very start. The Iranians were reluctant for a ceasefire. You've mentioned that, their pragmatism will eventually make them realize that they need to do this because this could become very, very bloody for them if there's troops on the ground. There will be potential for endless war, which is something they'd want to avoid. But let's assume it winds down. Let's assume pragmatism reigns over, and despite Netanyahu's biggest efforts to continue the war, it ends. What do you think happens then in terms of the Gulf relations with Iran, Iran's relationship with Saudi Arabia? Besides rebuilding, and we have a continually skeptical relationship with the USA and with Israel. But what do you think? What do you think happens beyond that?
Well, there will be conditions built into a ceasefire if one takes place, and one of them will be freedom of movement. The other will be some sort of guarantee to not attack your neighbors. Whether or not this will last, I don't know, but this ceasefire will be quite complicated to arrange, simply because of the range of different armed activity that's going on right now. But there will be certain fundamental principles that we built into a ceasefire. And there'll also, for that, have to be some sort of international guarantee that Iran is not attacked again. That Israel can't just carry on attacking it in the same way that they did southern Lebanon or indeed Beirut and Gaza. So those will have to be built into an agreement, and then the wider implications of it are, I think this is the third Gulf War. It's a very big event, and it'll take a lot of digesting, even if it stops tomorrow. We've already talked about the changing relationship between the Gulf and the US. I think that's certain to happen, because the Gulf, particularly the Saudi Arabians, but the Saudis, but also everyone in the Gulf told Trump, "Don't do this. You're going to get a regional war," and he disregarded them. So that element of trust is completely missing between the Trump administration now and every single Gulf state. How that is expressed and what are the parameters, how they go forward, they could be much more neutral. They could try and balance one power off another, of China off America. But the relationship that they had before the war, which was you had this bubble of wealth, and if anything happened, you had the Americans to protect you. That's been shattered, and that's a pretty significant consequence of the war that Trump has got to even start to get his head around.
Okay. We've mentioned sort of blowback to Trump and how he hasn't been able to achieve his goals. Netanyahu obviously was hoping for this war, and it may still continue, and he may still achieve his goals. It may become a very bloody war, but it seems that may be not likely. What does blowback for Netanyahu look like? Not just in terms of, the Gulf states now would be more skeptical of him. The US would be more skeptical of going and attacking Iran again. There'd be a ceasefire in place if it comes to fruition, where there will be a lot of conditions on him not to attack Iran again. He may not listen to those conditions, but it will upset those who mediate the ceasefire. But also just in terms of the American support, because like you said, MAGA has been split now. Netanyahu was already losing a lot of support. Israel was already losing a lot of support in the USA. What does blowback for him look like?
Okay, well, there's an immediate blowback and there's a long-term one. You mentioned the long-term one, and that's the changed relationship. I don't think a single US president now. Have you noticed how silent and quiet J.D. Vance has been?
It's true,
right?
Yeah.
Why is he so silent, right? It's not because he's remotely pro-Palestinian or pro-Arab. It's because he realizes that if and when he gets the presidency, he's got the freedom to do something completely different. Long-term, America will rush to Israel's defense, but it will still have that. But there'll be many, many questions asked. Is this really Israel's defense, or are we just helping Israel destabilize the region, particularly with this project of a greater Israel? So that's the long-term effect. But the short-term effect is the end of the Abraham Accords. Can you see any Arab leader now shaking hands with Netanyahu? It's just not going to happen. The Gulf can see very clearly what the Abraham Accords was about. It wasn't a partnership of equal. It was signed here on the dotted line. We'll have all this trade, but we are the big brother. Israel is the big brother. And no Arab leader now is going to accept that after what happened to Iran. However angry they are with Iran, the Saudis have kept. They were fighting the Iranian proxy, the Houthis in Yemen. They've kept to that détente. They've kept Iranian pilgrims at the Hajj. They're keeping their side of things, and I think that will be the way forward, that they will not want to shatter their relations with Iran, even though Iran has caused phenomenal damage to now their economic interests and to a lot of their infrastructure. And they're doing that not out of any love for Iran, but out of national self-interest.
Just a point to make is that, the war has already been devastating from a human perspective. Upwards probably in total of about more than 2,000 people have been killed easily. Iran's attacks on GCC states and other outside, the civilian casualties have been very little, and obviously if they have occurred, it's often from debris from missiles that have been shot down. There have been intense attacks because they've hit key, tourist, like the airports. They've hit airports, they've hit hotels. They have hit U.S. bases and infrastructure and oil refineries. But sometimes, Iran has also flexed in the region previously through the Houthis, through militias in Syria, where, the death tolls and stuff are quite hectic. So if this war continues, because we've been tending to kind of, try to look at the half glass full, the glass half full in the last 20 minutes or so. But this war could become much more devastating. It could be that, we do end up seeing various militias in various countries fighting. How bad can bad be?
A lot worse. Iran strikes me as still having cards to play. One is the Iraqi militias that they have. The other is the Houthis. And the Houthis have the power to do to the Straits, to the Bab el-Mandeb, what the Iranians have done to the Straits of Hormuz. And that would be to stop all traffic going through up to the Red Sea and through Suez, through the Suez Canal. So the Houthis have not yet struck the first blow. They have a complete capacity to hit ships anywhere. They've got surface-to-sea missiles, a huge number of them, and they've been involved in previous wars. They were hit by the Americans, but they are absolutely ready to go. Now, if and when they're required, and if this war deepens, I think it's only a matter of time before the Houthis enter it and widen the conflict still further to another key waterway, and use any ship with an international Western flag, I presume, would be a target. I don't think we'd have anything. The Americans would have nothing to stop them other than bombing again Sana'a, which they've already done once. And very nearly got 2 F-16s downed by Houthi air defenses. There's one incident in which 2 planes were very nearly downed by anti-aircraft fire and missiles. So we're dealing with an extremely rugged militia who again battle hardened, and who have a tremendous capacity. They are not being deployed at the moment. The Iraqi militias have already been in action by claiming that they sent drones over, but they're also highly armed and have a capacity. They've already in the past been responsible for American casualties in a strike against an American base that wasn't even officially recognized in Jordan, and they can do that again. So Iran has cards to play. The fact that it is continuing with a strategy and a game plan, uninterrupted by the pounding that they are facing, the fact that they have an effective wartime leadership that can survive assassination, and the fact that they've still got other militias who have yet really to enter the war, all strike me as, if I were to bet and say, who's got the better long-term plan, the military long-term plan? Is it Trump or is it Iran? I would say definitely it's Iran.
I mean, I think a big part of that equation is because it's the asymmetric warfare. Iran, it costs a lot less to attack Israel and to attack the GCC states than it costs the other side to defend it. I mean, in the event that Israel can't, its ability
the other
to...
thing they've got, and I think we completely we get sucked into this debate about hardware and deterrence. But they've got people on their side. They've got the people of the region on their side. And that makes so much difference. The Americans are uninvited guests. The Israelis are uninvited. You've got the feeling of the whole Arab people and the Iranian people basically wanting Iran to win. And that is much more important when it comes to asymmetric warfare than any of the hardware. And we constantly discount what the Arab Street says. I started MEE almost wholly to actually get that voice of the Arab Street across into mainstream journalism, We don't reproduce the voice of government, but we rejoice of the peoples in the country. Those are our sources. That's where we're not addressing ourselves to governments. We're addressing ourselves to the nations of the Middle East. And when we're wargaming, we discount the effect that popular opinion has, and I think there's massive popular opinion that would sustain an asymmetric war for a long time, and excuse me, but the US don't have popular opinion in the region on their side, and that is a massive handicap.
Do you think, though, that in the event, and I completely agree with that point, in the event that Israel's ability to continue to defend itself becomes limited because it's just too expensive in terms of the THAAD missiles and everything else, and the war continues, do you think if Iran does then launch quite a heavy missile attack on Israel that it can't defend, do you think, how bad could that be? Do you think Israel will eventually, if we get there, do you think they'll unleash nuclear weapons?
I simply don't know enough to be able to answer that question. There have been hints about the use of an Israeli nuke that's come up. That, in exactly the same way as there were hints that Putin could use a nuclear strike to stop the loss of what his troops gained in Ukraine. That's a cry of despair, because that's basically saying
that's a suicide for them as well.
It's suicide for them as well. So I think for the moment I'm discounting that, because therein lies madness.
Final questions before I wind on. Russia are probably quite happy because they now can sell more oil than they could. They've also been supplying the Iranians with intelligence, and the Chinese are probably quite happy as well. How do you think they feel about this? And if this goes on, how would they get further dragged into this war?
Well, I think the Chinese are very unhappy about this war, partially because they're not combatant. International law it's an illegal war. International law does not support this, nor do the Europeans either. Unlike the Iraq invasion or the toppling of Gaddafi in Libya, there was no debate in the UN, and there's no resolution by the UN Security Council. So all of this is in Trump's, the legality or otherwise of this is totally in Trump's and Netanyahu's head. And there was no way in which America was threatened by Iran before this war stood out, before this war broke out, or before they attacked Iran. So I think anyone in the world who's watching this is particularly concerned about the precedents this war has set, and they absolutely do not want to get involved in it. They'll help Iran when they can. China's previously hinted that the fall of the Iranian regime would be a red line for them. And as it would be for Russia. But at the moment, they prefer the plausible deniability of helping Iran when they could, and making sure and hoping against hope that Iran will not collapse as a result.
David Hearst, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.